Wow, good afternoon. Really impressed at the full house we have here. And we recognize that there are a lot of good talks happening at the same time slot, so we appreciate you choosing to be at ours. I'm Angela Thalls. I'm a UX researcher at UC Santa Cruz.
And I'm Mary Watkins, a UX manager at UC Santa Cruz.
And we're here to go over human-centered approaches for building communities to practice. Welcome.
We want to start by acknowledging that the UX community, we use a lot of terms that are closely related. UX, for those that are new, stands for user experience. Yes, it should be UE, but UX just sounds a lot better. The key word for all these words, human-centered design, user-centered design, and human-computer interaction is the human element, the user. But regardless of the term, UX helps us understand our services and products from a user's perspective. Wikipedia gives a great definition, which is user-centered design tries to optimize the product around how users can, want, or need to use the product, rather than forcing users to change their behavior to accommodate their product. A lot of times in higher education, we expect the users to accommodate to our platform or third party that we use.
This year's conference theme of community building really resonated with us. As a remote team, we're always investigating new ways to connect with people. The UX community has developed a range of tools and methods, many of which can be adopted for different uses, both in person and remote. And they're actually really valuable for collaboration and building community. They don't necessarily require expertise, just a willingness to try. And we're going to introduce several simple tools and approaches that you can use. Okay, I have to ask, who here has run into difficulty trying to connect or engage other people on their campus?
Almost everyone.
Yeah, it's you can run into skepticism or maybe resistance if someone doesn't really know you. And to be fair, new people may be uncertain or even wary of what our intentions are. So the tools we're reviewing today, we hope will help facilitate that process for you. So we're going to look at gaining understanding through listening sessions, expanding connections, and we're going to show you how we created a research pool of campus constituents for providing input. We'll also share how you can learn and analyze with collaborative mapping tools. And we're going to look at how to facilitate decision-making and prioritizing using mapping tools. So first, we're going to gain understanding through listening sessions. Now, when we work in IT, it may seem odd to think that we have to go ask for input because we get so much input from people. But enlisting structured listening sessions actually helps guide the conversation and keep the focus on the topic at hand. Whether you run a service or you're architecting a new system, managing a team, or budgeting for your division, the following approaches can actually really help facilitate conversations, both with colleagues and with end users. So we recommend listening sessions because they help to engage and build, trust in relationships. It really works with sessions with people across your campus, and it provides insight into areas that you may not have been exposed to, as well as building, trust and relationships. We really recommend Tova Soroka's article, Listening Session Playbook. It outlines how to facilitate using listening sessions, which are, they're really focusing on the priorities of the person being talked to rather than our priorities. So here's an example. We just recently undertook a campus-wide survey on information technology, and we had an idea of what we wanted to learn, but we wanted to enlist subject matter experts to make sure that we are on track. We identified folks within our division and across campus, and we reached out. I did a friendly note with suggested meeting times, but you could also use the appointment slots in Google Calendar. That's really helpful when you're engaging with a lot of folks. But what we did is we kept the sessions really brief to about 20 minutes with a little overlap for discussion and to answer their questions afterwards. We structured a simple agenda. It's good to have a framework. That way, every person that you're talking to, you're making sure you're hitting sort of the same areas of focus. Made sure to do introductions and explain who we were and what our intentions were. To give an overview of the project that we were embarking on, and then having several open-ended questions, which are really meant to elicit feedback, often things you hear that you wouldn't expect. And again, having that time at the end so that they can ask their questions. Sessions can generate a lot of feedback. This was just from one participant. So we really recommend when you undertake these kinds of meetings to have a person as a facilitator running the conversation and then another person as a note taker. You want to go slow to build familiarity and trust and let them know you see them as a colleague and a subject matter expert, and that it's an opportunity to hear their ideas. And we evaluated the input that we got from those folks against our research questions and actually found that they were validated. We also gained ideas for further research outside of the survey, and of equal value was building those relationships so that we could engage with those folks on other projects.
So next we'll share how we created a research pool. We were really inspired by the work of the University of Arizona UX community. If you visit uxua.arizona.edu, and we'll have the slides at the end of the session, so you'll have all these links. You can see the amazing work they've done there. So research pool benefits are really high. Instead of having to find participants every time you want to test something or have a survey or a study, you just have a pool that people sign up for, and then you can access it more quickly. So this reduces the time it takes you to do your UX research. Somewhat scales and operationalizes it. So you can get different access to different types of participant, faculty, staff, student, transfer, first generation, whatever you choose to ask for your variables. You can get whatever type of feedback you need. It gives you insight into roles and areas of campus where you may not know anybody, and there's a lot probably. It empowers people also, so people feel more connected to campus when they can give feedback directly on IT services and products. So it's not that hard to sign up to start this. It seems kind of daunting, but we just invite people to sign up over email at the beginning of the academic year through clubs that have UX. A lot of student clubs helped us out with this. We also had a link to it when we did our campus-wide IT survey. It's not often that we can send things out to all campus. So at the end of the survey, there was just a link that said, hey, do you like giving feedback? Sign up and you can give more. And we have prizes and incentives. And then we also just mention it a lot when we're talking to people that seem like they really want to give feedback or have great ideas on campus. So our first year, we now have 118 members, which is pretty decent. We just have a simple Google form. We ask their email, their role, their department, or their field of study, and what type of activity they might be interested in. And we capture their info in a Google spreadsheet. We can keep track of whether someone's participated in a recent study so that we don't pull the same people over and over. And then members are just emailed periodic invitations to join an activity like feedback or listening sessions or usability testing for specific applications. The participants decide whether to opt in to any activity. And we're very clear in our email about the expected time commitment, the description of the activity, the privacy, and if there's incentives. we recommend if it's more than 30 minutes that you should definitely reward people, pay them for doing user research on campus. So we've found we were able to give bookstore swag. Some at UCLA, when I worked there, we put points on their Bruin card, which is just really easy. Like, hey, can you talk to me for 5 minutes for $5 on your Bruin card about blah, 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 and just get people walking by. It worked great. And then for our recent activities at UCSC, we just have Amazon gift cards for people. We also wanted to make sure that we were acknowledging the privacy of our participants. We wanted to make sure that we tell them how we're going to store and use the data, how anonymous it will be. There's lots of templates you can use online. Like there's a book called Surveys That Work that's really great, or you can take a look at UCSC's on our ITS website. Our leadership worked with us on this, as well as IT security. So it's a collaborative effort, and our lovely communications department. Hey, Lisa.
Now that we've looked at building connections with campus members, we're going to take a look at collaborative mapping. Okay, so mapping actually refers to simple diagrams that represent organization relationships over a period of time. A process or journey map, as you see here, which is a simple matrix, works this way. It goes from left to right, and each column is a step further out in time. And you can also segment different groups by rows. Maps capture information such as key phases or stages in a process, key contact or touch points, including the user, things happening behind the scenes, any systems that you're working with, as well as milestones. And when you're listening to people, you can actually use maps for structured notes, and it really helps facilitate the conversation. Session mapping motivates group participation and sharing, and it creates useful artifacts you can reference and analyze later. Analyzing what you capture helps discover and prioritize, common ideas or themes that emerge. In this article, UX mapping methods compared, a cheat sheet from NMG is really useful in identifying different methods. And the Nielsen-Norman group is a great resource for all things UX. They have videos and articles. So here's an approach that we used during a listening session. And this was actually on Google Draw. I would do it on Miro now. But what we had was a team working on a very complex service process that engaged with a large number of departments across campus during the process life cycle. And there were people within this team that had no idea what other members were doing. And what we did was we really stepped through the process 1 week at a time, and that's what each column is. And we listened and we filled out notes as folks volunteered what they worked on at that point in the process. The columns indicated, again, each sort of step or phase, and the rows, also referred to as swim lanes, referred to different groups. And we used color-coded stickies as well to designate the work that groups were doing. So you can see that different groups might be working in parallel at a different phase. And what happened is it was really eye-opening for people in this discussion because they hadn't previous insight to what another group was doing. And for them to see it all laid out was a revelation for them. So highly recommend it. I mean, it's always obviously useful to map your processes, but to be able to use it in a conversation, it's a good thing.
Here's another example. This is called a current state diagram. Was useful at work recently. We had a process for requesting a new physical server that parts of the process were understood by different parties that were participating in it. So in one of our meetings, we created this diagram together in Miro. Miro is an online collaborative tool. Everyone can go in there and work at once. So here we have the columns as the different steps in the process. includes customer initiation, review, approval, shipping, installation, configuring, testing, and don't forget to loop back to the customer at the end. There's a lot of different processes here. There's also points in the process where it needs to go back, where say something wasn't approved, the configuration wasn't approved. So creating this diagram together, I think helped us gain a view into other groups' processes and how the overall process worked until you sort of understand the current situation. You can't really talk about the future situation. You kind of have to untangle them first. And Jeffrey actually helped us work on this diagram. That's why he's laughing. Our research IT. So it's hard to, when everyone's saying, well, I think we should do this, I think we should do this, but no one really has a clear map in front of them of how it currently is. It's very confusing. So I think this helped a lot in understanding and untangling what should be versus what is.
And going back to our recent survey work, this map is a really rough first pass at thinking about how to disseminate survey findings. Hand waving. So from left to right, we're looking at time, and we're thinking about groups that we might disseminate information to. And again, this is a rough first pass, but we knew we wanted to do IT leadership and then IT as a division, campus leadership, and then disseminating out to the campus community. But we also knew that we had different channels of communication. So we wanted to look at, obviously, before the survey, we had discussions and we did our listening sessions. But then we also thought about, okay, we know we're going to do a report, but what else what other channels can we use to disseminate information that might be appropriate for different groups? So this is a little bit different map in which it's looking at two processes at once. Okay, so let's talk about tools that help facilitate decision-making. We know that we can use maps and conversations, but if we can use a similar kind of diagramming method that actually helps move the group towards making decisions, it's a very powerful thing. And you know that can be difficult, right? When you're working with diverse groups with different backgrounds and personalities and working styles and maybe even priorities. So we're going to look at a structured method for identifying priorities, conducting voting, and hopefully reaching group decisions. It's especially effective if you have members in the group who might be quieter or reluctant to share, or you've got, some personalities that are really strong and tend to dominate the conversation. So prioritization matrices are really important because they help you surface ideas, keep the group focused on the task, and then evaluating democratically whether the ideas are viable. And it's more objective, right? Rather than a bunch of, subjective ideas being sort of shouted out. You can use this method in person on a flip chart or on a whiteboard or on a remote whiteboard like Jamboard, Miro, or Mural. Okay, so the way that it works is we have two axes. We have a x-axis, which goes across left to right, and we have a vertical y-axis. And each axis represents a variable. So in this case, we're going to look at feasibility and impact. And within each of those variables, we're going to be looking at a range from low feasibility to high feasibility or low impact to high. And this is where our quadrant comes in. You're just going to divide that region into 4 areas. Okay, so lower left, we're looking at lower feasibility and lower impact. So with low feasibility, low impact, the idea probably isn't, as worth consideration. High feasibility, but low impact down here on the bottom right, or high impact, but low feasibility in our upper left. It could be a maybe, but it's not a definite. And then in the upper right, we have high impact and high feasibility. So it seems like any ideas that land in this quadrant are pretty much worth consideration. Okay, so here's an example of this at work. We did a quick brainstorming. We had some ideas for UX approaches, and we were, throwing a few of them out there. And the next step was applying it to the matrix. So an unlinked feedback form. It's not very useful because it's not specific to a particular service. It's not linked to anything. Who knows how people would get to it? So that's an example of something that probably is low impact and is not well defined. So it's not really feasible at this point in time. So it's going to go in our no region. And then review of other data sources. We look a lot at our ServiceNow data and other data that's readily available. We have other data sources and can access those, but we have no idea what the impact might be. So that's probably a maybe. And a dashboard reflecting real-time feedback. That would be really very impactful. We've talked about it, but at this point in time, we just don't have the bandwidth to build that out. So high impact, low feasibility, it's a maybe also. And then UX research pool activities. We have a process, we have a participant pool. It's proven, so it's clearly high feasibility, high impact, and it's in our yes quadrant. So as a group, we looked through the ideas and we, debated what's, more likely to be effective or to be realistic and to build out. We placed them on the matrix, and it's a good way of sort of defining, okay, these are the areas probably worth our focus. Next slide. And you were going to go.
So after the discussion, if you need further guidance, voting can be really helpful if it's sort of a democratic thing or you're just feeling the temperature of the room. One idea is to give everyone 3 green dots and they can choose 3 things they want to vote for. You can force people to rank if that helps. 1, 2, 3, most favorite ideas. Or you can use stickies and emojis, especially if there's a lot of trust in the room, like it helps people express their emotions. They love a project or shocked or unhappy, or it can give a low stakes way for people to express themselves. So here's how the outcome might look for voting. And then just visually right away, you can see that, the survey and the research pool got the most votes, and that's actually what we ended up doing this year. So a final tip before we say goodbye is to join the UC UX community. It's a friendly, welcoming community for anyone that's interested in UX. We have project managers, content strategists, communication people. You are welcome there. You can find out about a lot of different UX tools and methods for like this talk through UC UX. And we are a friendly community of practice we are focused on improving the user experience across the UC system and finding commonalities. So you can join us on Slack, or our webpage is right there. We host a few UX related activities each year. We had a UX usability workshop in June, some show and tell sessions, community events, and we have meetups sometimes. We had one yesterday here at UC Tech. So it's an opportunity for the greater UC community to start connecting around humans and user experience, which if you're here, you probably think it's sort of at the heart of everything we do.
In summary, we don't have to work isolated just in our own group or get stuck in familiar processes. There's strategies you can use to engage with other folks. And today we've looked at several simple UX tools and approaches that you can use, including leading listening sessions, which gain better understanding of others and their work, creating communities like our UX research pool, which helps expand and reinforce the connections to the campus. Developing partnerships by using tools in meetings which help facilitate ideas and understanding. That's great. And then the prioritization matrix is a great way to make more democratic decision-making. And now, how might you use these tools in your own work? Please, we open the
Question as well when you're ready.
Okay.
Sure.
Online question. It's from Eric Wheeland at UCSF. He does love the inclusion. How do you steer the conversation away from venting sessions? From what session?
Then how do you steer the conversation away from venting sessions? Yeah, we've talked a lot about this. I think it's important to have a little vent at first, and it helps build empathy for each other. And you realize that a lot of your problems are the same as other people's. You're not alone. Given that, then this is the time to not get jaded and unhappy and talk about the successes you've had and how we can make things better. So I think it's important to have a balance and start talking about the positive changes you wish to make, because it can get easy to get bogged down when you're a university employee about how you wish things would be different.
I think it does build trust in the sense that the person feels like they're being heard. If you make yourself available to hear their complaints, maybe bound it and say the first 10 minutes, we're open to any concerns that you might have, and then we'll move forward with this next step in the meeting.
Actually, I have a follow-up to that.
So I guess similar, it's very loud. How do you manage expectations, I guess, in that same regard? So let's say, well, keeping the human element that we're all here for, right? So how do you bring in the situation where you're research pooling, you're surveying, you're whatever, but you're collecting all this feedback, but you can't implement all that feedback? How do you manage those expectations ahead of time for the people participating, that not everything is either feasible or whatever, or will, however that gets framed? Because me personally, I've been on the other side of that, where someone has wanted to get my feedback. I spent a lot of time giving it to them, and then I got nothing later, or I don't know, those expectations were not managed up front.
Yeah, I think you kind of answered the question. And actually, when we did our listening sessions, we did run across that concern. We, made ourselves available to really hear what their ideas and concerns were and let them know that we would be pulling those together, and not every issue might be able to be addressed, but they would be prioritized based on, how frequently an issue came up.
And is that communicated, like when you're talking about that, like beforehand, during the session, like before? Okay.
It's funny, like with students, a lot of times people are really worried about that, and it hasn't turned out to be an issue because no one's ever listened before. And they're just like, oh, you get it. Like, thank you for talking to me. Even if I understand, and they get very understanding. Even if you can't solve it, I understand, like, you bringing this to the attention of people. You have to balance that, of course, between staff members that have gone through a lot of management changes and are asked about the same project over and over again. Yeah, I feel you on that one too. Is that what happened to you?
No, but we're worried about it. So
I know. And that's tough because sometimes you don't have all the research that the previous person did.
I just had a sort of a technical thing. You mentioned, oh, we created this flow chart thing in this application, but I thought next time we would do it in something that sounded like Miro. And I don't know what that is. So I was curious.
Miro, M-I-R-O.
Oh.
It's an online whiteboarding, really so much more than just whiteboarding tool. It's fantastic.
Cool.
You could get a free education version, but it's very much like Google Whiteboard, Fig Jam. I think Google's
Jamboard.
Google Jamboard.
It's a virtual whiteboard.
You can use any tool. There's a lot of whiteboarding tools on there. The thing that's great about it is you can save it as an artifact, and many people can work on it at once. Like, you see people flying around, dragging stickies, creating notes. It's really fun. So that collaborative aspect of it is the thing, no matter what tool you use.
Yeah, it seems really cool because sometimes we do that sort of whiteboarding stuff in the staff meetings in the past, or or staff retreats.
Yeah,
And we've done the sticky things where people can go up and vote for their favorites and stick
Yeah.
their stuff together and organize the stickies and things. But now we have mixed, people will be online. And so we can't really do that up on the sticky board in the room we're doing.
yeah.
And so that's why I was interested in what the
It's
application was, because it
it's-
allows us to do that same thing online.
exactly. And it's perfect for remote teams. Our whole team is remote, so it really works for us.
Right.
And what was I going to say?
That's great. Thank you. Yeah.
One thing that's nice is that, sometimes you can have those voting sessions, and you all know each other and you're really familiar. But if you've got a mixed group of people and some people may be feeling a little insecure, you can have anonymous voting when you're doing the online. So it can make it more democratic. It's an option. You don't have to, but it's a nice option.
No, I see that. When we were doing them in persons, there's some people that did not want to walk up there with their idea.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
I think another thing I've noticed, I've only started using Miro and these collaborative tools in the past 2 years, but I always felt there was a gap between the slide, the Word doc, the Excel doc, and then some people could create diagrams if they had an Adobe product. There's a huge gap of information between Word documents and spreadsheets and slides. It needs to be a blank canvas, like anyone, regardless of artistic ability, can create simple diagrams. And so it really has been revolutionary, I think, in the way we
It's a
work.
game changer.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, nearby.
Thanks. I've got 3 questions, so feel free to cut me off if there's a crowd. First, how did you mitigate concerns around bias in your convenience user sampling methodology? For example, participants that are likely to opt in may be of a certain demographic, and other demographics may not be as well represented. Going forward, how would you further diversify your participant pool to be even more representative?
It's a good question. We did a really broad outreach. So for instance, on the survey, it went to every single member on campus. The invitation, of course, they could choose to opt in or not. That's part of, our philosophy behind it, but the outreach went everywhere. When we reach out at the beginning of the term or the beginning of the academic year, we really try and engage with professors, again, with the student clubs. It's a good question.
I think it depends, a lot of people wonder about sample sizes when you're doing UX research. And for the qualitative research, you really don't need that many people to get an idea of what's happening. If you talk to one person, it's better than 0. If you talk to 5 people, probably got 70% of the information you need. For surveys, it's hard. We don't sample, we send out to everyone. So there is possibly a negativity bias, but even though we don't have the highest response rate, in some cases, I think we only got 4.4% of faculty, which is pretty typical for surveys. We do know as an indicator of what to watch for. If there's issues, it'll probably come up in those people that put in the comments if it's important to them. So yeah, there's a lot of negativity bias, but we're also surprised that our ratings were fairly kind in some areas. So people weren't just logging on to blast us.
Cool. I do have one more, then I'll pass it. Did you create personas for your users before, during, or after testing? If so, what kind of personas did you end up coming up with?
I could take that one. So earlier on, before the survey process, our ServiceNow team was looking at rolling out a portal, and we did actually undertake a persona process. And I'm pretty proud of this. It was super accelerated, only about a 3-week process. But what we did is we looked at ServiceNow data. We reached out to our academic divisions and talked about, who might be a good representative person for, engaging with the ticket system. And then we looked at their ticket history, and we had a really good sense of what issues and questions and concerns they were raising. And we also knew a little bit about those folks as a person because we'd worked with them in the academic divisions. So we ended up with a set, I think, of about 18 folks, and it was a mix of all sorts of different staff, administrative. We had different faculty, including lecturers and, ladder rank. We had different types of students, graduate students, and really tried to pose some of the challenges that each of those groups faced. And that people have really expressed appreciation for having that set. As a rule, personas aren't the first place that we go, but I think what made those different and helpful is that we actually looked at the real ticket history. So each persona was based on an actual person. Oh, and it sounds like we've got time for maybe a few more questions. We've got about 10 minutes.
I have a question related to your impact and feasibility chart. I think that was a generated example that you guys had used at Santa Cruz, but I noticed that the low feasibility, but high impact ideas were not selected basically at all in the voting sequence. But that in comparison to the high feasibility, but low impact got a lot more votes from your people. So thinking about that from like a psychology standpoint, obviously the high impact, high feasibility is the ideal scenario. But did you guys get feedback in any capacity as to why perhaps the less feasible options, but with much higher impact, didn't really generate any sort of, you want to call it love?
So are you talking about the dots or just the actual placement of the ideas in the matrix?
The actual votes, which I assumed were the dots.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, and the dots, that's a sort of a second step. It's almost more like a tiebreaker. If you have, a number of people that feel really strongly, like you might have different camps that feel strongly about ideas and you're sort of at an impasse, like you're really trying to maybe come up with just one idea. That's an extra step of granularity that's useful. I think probably the fact that it's landed in that upper quadrant, the group has seen those ideas as viable. It would be more like a tiebreaker, I think, in the example we showed.
Did we have more red dot or green dots in the high feasibility, low impact than the low feasibility, high impact? Was that the way that worked?
Yeah, basically all the dots in the high feasibility, high impact, and then in the high feasibility, low impact, but none in the other.
That's interesting. Was that
Because
because
it just represents there's a couple of holdouts that still felt really strongly about those maybe ideas. Yeah.
Or could I suggest that the one that's in the upper left corner, which is, it's harder to do.
yeah, it's
So
more work.
It feels better to get something done. It feels better to get something done, which is the high feasibility, low impact. It's going to be hard to get that really hard one to do that has a high impact. It's harder to do that.
Yeah.
So from a psychological point of view, you're more likely to vote for either of the ones in the right-hand side because they're easier to do.
Yeah.
That's a great
Perfect.
observation.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Any more questions? I see one back there. Kristen.
If you could talk about your plans and research questions that you put together. You had a slide about challenges, hypotheses, and then I think questions. And I'm curious how you might describe the importance of goals related to your plan. And not a lot of people talk about hypotheses and how we're trying to debunk them and get to the core of the problem. And a hypotheses list like that is not as often seen. So maybe talk a little bit more about that.
So that participant is a very talented business analyst that we have at UC Santa Cruz, and she actually thinks that way. So another respondent might have not thought through the process like that.
But I think the research questions before we did the survey, and I actually didn't know to do this before I came to Santa Cruz, but to do the research questions before you write the survey questions is brilliant. because it helps keep you on track. It's so hard to write a survey. And so we went over with our CIO, do you want to know? What do you want to know? And it was things like, what's the perception of IT services? Are there things that are inequitable in terms of service? How satisfied are people with the tools? How satisfied are people with the support? This really helped us, because otherwise, especially when we have all these listening sessions, people are like, well, ask about my particular product, or I want to know this. It's a way to keep it high level, what you really want to know, because you could easily have like a 200-page survey with every tool and service on there. So yeah, research questions are great before you start any research project. Are we out of time?
No, no, right. I have a question.
Oh.
Oh, sorry. Oh, Oh, okay. So let's say that you get a really clear directive from users, they're fairly unhappy.
Yeah.
Sometimes UX teams are tightly aligned with development teams, engineers, sometimes they're not.
Yeah.
They're distant. And so you have these findings that are really strong, and you talk with the development team, and their positive performance evaluations are based on delivering.
Yeah.
And they don't include UX
Yeah.
at all. So what do you do?
I take that one.
Oh,
Well,
yeah, me too.
I'll start. We've definitely had this experience, and my approach is really to come in and hear their, how they work, what their concerns are, the development team, and give them an opportunity to know that their concerns are, recognized. But then to just introduce the idea of, and we talked about this yesterday in our breakout groups, that if we don't build it well, it will end up being in an increased support need or increased requests for fixing something later, and that really has impact on their team. And I found that's been effective, but it does take some building of the relationship and building that trust, for
Yeah.
sure.
You have to seek to understand them before you give them any recommendations off the top of your head, because they might not be able to do that technically, or you just don't understand their situation yet. The biggest persuasion tactic, I think, is to get them in front of students, have direct contact with students. We recently connected some students with our student portal development team and just let them talk. It was amazing. I think developers do want to make an amazing product, and they don't often talk to students directly. So get out of the way and don't persuade them. Let the students talk to them. It's much more effective.
Yeah, facilitating that.
Or
discussion.
let them watch a user trying to use it for 2 minutes. I know. Any others? Has anything else worked for people? Or-
Well, I was going to say, I used to do a lot more work like this, so it was really fun watching it. Thank you for sharing all of this. And one of the things that stands out from that time is that there would be really good ideas that, for either the prioritization reasons or timing or whatever, simply didn't make it to the top. And then sometimes they'd be there year after year or cycle after cycle. And I'm just curious, you have thoughts about how you close the loop with that. There's always somebody on the other end that for whom it's really important, desperate work, and they sort of see it not emerge. I'm wondering if you have thoughts about that part.
That's a good question. You want to take?
We used to, when I was on the faculty information system at UCLA, we would send out regular updates about what was in our backlog and have regular sessions with users and just be completely honest and transparent and say, we can't get that to that next year. There's no easy answer for that.
But I think that communication piece is important.
Yeah, people are pretty understanding. Well, thank you all for coming. If you'd like, thank you. Thanks so much. And here's our email if you want to keep in touch.
And if you want to see our slides, you can QR code. But you can reach out to us on Slack or by email, and we'll be happy to send you a link as well.